So the first thing I want to do is review what we talked about in the previous video, which was model view controller. We also got a chance to talk about properties and how we have variables and constants and how you're able to assign values to those. So we're going to review that. And also today we're going to talk about data types, and we're going to talk about syntax and what that means. So first off, let's go ahead and review what we talked about the last video. Last video we had talked about model view controller. So once again, just as a quick refresher, we have three areas. We have a view, we have a controller for our view, and we also have model objects or data. And what happens with our data? We're basically, so in this way we are customizing our view the way that we want using drag and drop, things like that. We'll get into that when we get to our project portion where we start building apps. We have a page of code or a controller that is manipulating the view. And then we also have pages of code, which is going to have all of our data in it. And our controller is going to be listening to that page of code and deciding what's going to be shown on the view. And that's what we're building up to. Also, we went over in the previous video properties. So properties, we have variables and we have constants, which are represented by var and let. And variables can be changed. They're very flexible, and the constants cannot be changed. Now, there's a reason for this, and I didn't go over this in the previous video, but you could imagine that there are some things that you don't want to change. So really quick, I'm going to open up Xcode here and show you what we worked on last time. Last time we had created a constant, which was name. We just got done talking about that. And then we had a variable called height. So height can be changed and name cannot. Simple as that. So today we're going to be talking about data types. Let me make sure I have a spot reserved for that. We can just do a little comment here. Let's have a little bit of fun with these comments here. And this section is going to be called data types. Okay, so before we go into data types, I'd like to put things into a really nice perspective for you. In order to do that, I'm going to pull up this. Okay, so what do we know about the English language? We know that we have numbers, we have grammar, we have letters, and we have verbs and nouns, etc. Right? What do we know about the programming language or a programming languages? Most programming languages have these same things. They have numbers, they have grammar, like a way of structuring things so that it's readable. We have letters, and we have verbs, nouns, and etc. So what are these really in a programming language? They're really actually type int for numbers, type string. Syntax is the way that we structure things, kind of like grammar, so that other programmers can read what we wrote, as well as the computer can only process things a certain way. They have to be written a certain way. We have methods and we have objects. So isn't that cool? So these things that we associate with in an actual language are the same things in a programming language. So let's take a closer look at these things. So these are all, int, string, and objects are all data types. let's take a closer look at the data types we're going to be talking about today. So we have strings, we have custom data types that we could make on our own. We have integers, which are numbers, doubles, which are decimal, and float value can be either or. We have a Boolean value, which would be true or false. There's more to float, but honestly, we can address that a little bit later. For now, you can use just integer or double, or if you're unsure, you could always use a float, but we'll talk a little bit more about that possibly in a future video. For now, the three main ones I'd like to focus on, which are some of the most important, we have strings, integers, and booleans. So what's a string? A string, like I said in the previous video, is essentially a string of characters that are pulled together inside of quotation marks. So anything you put inside of the quotation marks will become a string, with a few exceptions, which we'll talk about much later. Integers, they're just numbers. And we have Boolean, which represents true or false. So syntax. In the English language, we have periods, we have parentheses, colons, and commas, and whatnot. Guess what we have in a programming language? We have those same type of marks. They are a little bit different, and they're used for different things, but we have those same kind of marks. Once again, syntax is just this. It's very similar to grammar in the sense that, you know, someone's going to correct you, like, oh, you should say this way, or you should have written this with a comma. The only thing with syntax is there's a common way of writing things that programmers have agreed upon with certain languages. Also, the computer just won't accept certain things, and that's why we go over syntax. Now, we won't be talking about syntax directly. However, as I'm showing you all these things, I'll be kind of knocking syntax in your face, like telling you this is a way to write your code, and you can just kind of closely attach yourself to that. If you have any questions, you can always ask those in the comments below. My point of this discussion was really to introduce you to syntax and introduce you to the data types. These are the three main data types we're going to focus on for today. So now we can, I know that was a lot, but let's go ahead and jump into code. If you don't remember, you can always go up to File, New, and you can create a new playground. You can always go to File and Open Recent if you'd like to open up a recent playground that you created in the past. Also, you can go to Open, File Open, and you'll be able to find your playground that you had created before by going to Documents, Development, if you had created the folder like I did earlier. Without further ado, let's continue. So one thing we were doing before is we were actually creating properties just by saying whether or not it's a var or a let, whether or not it's a variable or a constant. We would name it, and then we would use the assignment operator, which is the equal sign, and we would assign it a value, and the value could be anything. Now, it's time for something new. Notice in the previous video, I had showed you that if you were to try and take height or name and assign it like a number, then it wouldn't work. Like, for example, height is a number right now. This is a double. If I were to call upon height, see it autofills like before, and I assign it a value of test, notice it fails, and it tells us exactly why it fails. It says cannot assign a value of type string to type double. So what this means is a variable can be changed as long as, or you can assign a variable another value as long as that value is the same data type that it was before. So because height is the data type double, you aren't allowed to assign a new value that isn't double, even if it's a variable. So one good practice, one really awesome practice, you don't have to do this, but it's good to get some, I want to give you some good practices ahead of time. And one great way to ensure that you always know what data type you had written is to do this. You can go var height, we'll go do the colon, and then you can tell it, hey, I want to use a double. And notice that autofilled for me, so you don't need to remember all of these. You just need to be able to get in the ballpark. Use the assignment operator and say weight is going to be, there you go, something like that. So basically, you already know we tell it whether or not it's a variable or a constant. We give it a name. There's a new part now. We do a colon, and then we say what type it is. We explicitly say what type it is. And then we use the equal sign, and we can say, this is 165, or we can put in the value there. And ahead of time, as you're doing this, if you were to try and put in a string here, it's going to say, hey, you can't assign a string to a double. So this is a great way to neatly put your things together. You always know what type something is. Also, just so you know, you can always check what type something is by holding the Option key down on your keyboard and clicking on it. And right down there, it tells you what it is. Like dog, for example, it is of type string. So it's telling us that. Awesome. So what does it look like to do that to dog? That would be a colon right next to it, and we type in the word string. This is just proper syntax. You don't have to write it this way. It'll still work exactly the same. This is just what I recommend. If you want to write clean code, you want to write code that looks really nice. Not to say that this page looks great or fantastic, but this is one thing that will help you to make your code more readable for other people, and it'll be impressive to some people that you're able to keep things looking this neat. So what about the new data type that I mentioned a while ago, the Boolean data type? Why is it called Boolean? Honestly, I don't know, but I can do var, or I would get into the habit of doing let unless it tells you can't, but let is teaching Swift of type bool equals true. Now, Boolean is always going to be true or false in the language of Swift. In this programming language, Boolean is always going to be true or false. In some of the languages, it's going to be yes or no. In some of the languages, it could be true or false, all capital. It can be, it's different things in other languages. It could be 0, 1, but essentially in this language, it's going to be true or false. Okay. So that means that we want to change this actually to a var because we want to be able to change this. So we can go is teaching Swift equals false. And then the value changes. Also, one thing I never mentioned in the previous video is you're able to actually call these things again and just see what's in them. So I can call is teaching Swift, and then we wait a moment, and the gutter on the side, the right hand side, we can see the value for that item. This is another point that I brought up in the previous video where we talked about how playgrounds, which we're in right now, we're in a playground. Playgrounds actually are like a lot like a scratch piece of paper, where if you're in like some kind of math class, maybe you are taking a test and you have a piece of paper next to you and you're like, man, I need to write this out and see what the results are. This is essentially it. Basically, you can open up a playground and you can test and find out if some implementation, some code is actually going to work, if it's going to run before you actually put it into your code. Now, to some people, this is a little irrelevant, and this is kind of why I don't use playgrounds very much anymore. When you're working in a project, it's pretty good at telling you, like, hey, you messed up. You need to rewrite this. So you don't have to stress out too much about using a playground specifically, but it is a great tool to be used. One more thing before we move on. I did not tell you that you could use I didn't tell you that you could use an iPad. You can actually use an iPad, and you can download the Swift app in order to do the majority of these first beginner tutorials that I'm doing here. The Swift app will allow you to open up a blank file, and you can do all the exact same things I'm doing right now in code. So just keep that in mind. So syntax is what we use to make sure that our code looks a certain way and we kind of abide by some general rules. I gave you a new way to write your variables and constants, and that is with colon and explicitly saying, hey, I'm using a string. This is going to be a string. This is going to be a double. This is going to be a Boolean. Yeah, we blew through those data types really quickly. There is something now that I would like to share with you just as a tidbit. We'll go over more in the next video, but I'm going to give you an extra nugget, and that will be arrays, since we went through this so fast. So a lot of times in code, you're going to need to keep track of a collection of objects or data types, things like that. And what we use to keep track of those things is we end up using an array. So let me write an example for you really quick. So an example of an array would be maybe the days of the week is a good example. So do days of the week. And we can use our assignment operator, and then we would use our square brackets, and inside of the square brackets we would actually put our information, put our values. And this is a collection. This is how we house a collection of a particular data type. So we have to have the square brackets around, and then we can say, for example, 10. Oh, no, not 10. We'll do Monday. And Tuesday. And so on and so forth. Notice that we have a comma that is separating each value here. And these are strings, so we would need to put our quotation marks on these. And that's how we make an array. Now, if we're going to abide by the syntax rules that I had showed you a minute ago, you would do days of, and I'm going to show you and tell you about our rules with capitalization in a second, but days of the week, colon, and these are strings up here. These are strings. So I would do an array of strings and then equal sign, and then I would put the actual days of the week like I was about to do up here. So let's see what that looks like in code. So if we were to go in here, and I'm just going to give myself a little bit of room here to get some of this out of the, I can go var. In programming, we have naming conventions, and we also have a way of formatting our names. We format our names for variables and constants or properties in general with lower camel case. Lower camel case is where you start out with a lowercase letter for the first word, and then every other word following starts with an uppercase letter. So it would be days of the week, colon, string. Our assignment operator, open up the brackets again, and we can start putting some of these guys in. So Monday. All right, so I purposefully left off the last couple days of the week. I really want to show you most of what I have to teach you about arrays. Get this out of the way. So one of the things is, how do you actually access an element in this array? Like, how are you going to access Tuesday, for example? We might want to access Tuesday by saying days of the week, opening up the brackets, and we will say index 1. So we'll pass through a 1 there. And as you can see on the right-hand side, it says Tuesday. So why did 1 access Tuesday and not Monday? That is because an array, the elements in an array start at 0. So Monday would be 0, Tuesday would be 1, and so on and so forth. The next would be 2, next would be 3. So remember that your elements in your array always start at 1. So the next thing would be, how do you add something to your array? Because we're obviously missing a couple of days in this array. So you can use dot notation. This is a big one. I know that we're kind of leaping a little bit. I know this is probably becoming a lot, especially if you've never programmed before. But when you have an array, you've called upon an array like we did right now. We called upon days of the week. If you hit period, then notice that you get some options here. So first off, because of how we put the brackets together and we put our values in and everything like that, the program that you're running, Xcode, it knows that days of the week is an array, okay? And so when you, it has special functions for things that are arrays. So since this is an array, we can use dot notation to access some features of an array. And one of those features is append. One of those functions is append. And what's really cool about Xcode is in here, when you use dot notation, it'll usually tell you a little bit about the item you have selected. So right now I have append selected. If I go down one, it tells me exactly what it said. Like right here, it says adds a new element at the end of the array. So we know that's going to add a new element and it's going to be at the end of the array. So it's telling us all this stuff. What if I wanted to find out how many items are in that array? Well, we have this count property here, and this count property is going to, it gives us the number of elements in the array. So in the future, very soon, I will teach you how to make your own elements that you'll be accessing just like this. You're going to make your own objects. You're going to access your own stuff off of it just like this. But for now, this is an array, and we are trying to add something to that array. So we're going to use a method. It's called a method that is included with all arrays, and it's the ability to append. So I'm going to append, and I'm going to put Saturday. And I'm also going to call days of the week again, dot append. Notice I didn't select sequence. Adds the element of a sequence to the end of the array. I believe this is if we wanted to add a couple of elements at a time. I'll explore that and get that back to you later. But for now, we just want a new element, a new string element. We're going to add Sunday. All right, so now if we call days of the week and we open up our gutter a little bit, let's see what we got here. We got all the days of the week. Awesome. So I'm going to label this over here. I think this is a good stopping point. This is more than I wanted to do in this video. My main goal was teaching you about data types and teaching you about syntax. I feel like that was a little bit short, so I wanted to give you an extra tidbit, which is arrays. Go back through this video over and over again. If you have some questions, please leave a comment. It's great practice for me, refining the basics. I'm doing really, even when you start doing really complicated things in programming, it's always great to refine the essentials. All the basics are great to go back over. If you have any questions about these things, go ahead and shoot in a comment below. Hopefully in the next video, we'll talk about maybe dictionaries. We'll review arrays again. And as we move along, we'll keep integrating these things. These are just building blocks on all the different things that you can do. A lot of this may not seem like, you may be asking like, oh man, like, what is this building up to? Once again, you remember what it builds up to. It builds up to the model view controller. You're going to have a bunch of different views on the iPhone that someone's going to see, like buttons and things like that. You're going to have a page of code that is going to be your controller for each one of those views. And then you're going to have your model objects. You're going to have some data that is going to tie in. You're going to have your controller is going to be able to get some information from that data and then display it for the user to be able to see. So thank you so much for making it through another video. If you have any feedback, please leave that down below. You can hit me up on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever, if you have some questions. And hope you enjoyed. Have a good night.